using Buddhist Fellowship. Thank you, Brother Terence. Good afternoon, Ajahn Brahmali.
Hello, everyone. Hi.
Let's pay 3 respects to Ajahn first before we start the session. First bow. Second bow.
Musaga, please leave the door open. Yeah.
Third bow.
Yeah.
Okay,
All the way. Okay. So, so let's carry on what we did yesterday. So I heard Ajahn Brahm was telling me this morning that he was making some jokes about the Kālāmas Sutta yesterday. So now I'm going to have to just say something about about that. Otherwise, so we kind of get ironed out any discrepancies or whatever you might call it. So yesterday we had a look at the idea that the Buddha always gives preference to personal experience, our understanding of the world, our experience of the world, which includes insights, includes deep meditation experience, and all of these kind of things. This is what he gives priority to, and then he, he's initially at least that is what we should focus on here. And it's very interesting, and I think Ajahn Brahm, this was a point that Ajahn Brahm made, is that we are reading a sutta, and in that sutta it says we should not read the suttas. So that is not exactly what it says, but that is what it looks like it says. And it is a very important point because it sounds like a contradiction. How can you not take an interest in the suttas, in the tradition of Buddhism, etc., and at the and at the same time we are using this particular sutta? It seems like a contradiction in terms, and it's one of those important problems in modern Buddhism. You see it around the world, especially among the secular Buddhists. The secular Buddhist will say that it is okay to reject certain Buddhist teachings, and the reason it's okay is because of what it says in the Kālāmas Sutta. The Kālāmas Sutta says we can reject the traditions. But of course, what that means is that we also have to reject the Kālāmas Sutta itself. So then the advice itself becomes doesn't work. So then we get into a kind of a complicated paradox in a sense, and so the whole thing stops working. So what is the way out of this paradox is one of those important questions when it comes to the Kālāmas Sutta. And as always, when we deal with the suttas, the word of the Buddha, the context in which those suttas are spoken is so important. It really matters what the context is. And this is what we have to understand in this case as well. If you understand the context, then this seeming paradox, it resolves itself, and there is no paradox anymore. And that context is that the Buddha is traveling around India and is meeting all kinds of people who haven't really heard the Buddhist teachings before. They may be interested in spirituality in general, but they never really heard these kind of teachings. So this is a teaching to new people, to newcomers to Buddhism. And when you are a newcomer, you need a way to decide if these teachings are good or bad. And that is the way to decide. The way to decide is then to look at your personal experience. Does that personal experience match with these teachings? And if there is a good match, then there is good grounds for accepting these teachings. That's probably saying something interesting. And then when you have taken that first step, then gradually you build up. And then you start reading the suttas more because you get inspired by them. You see that there's something beautiful going on with these suttas. You see something that describes the human condition in the way that we probably all can recognize. This was one of those powerful things for me, is that so much of the suttas, they describe what it is to be a human being, and they describe it on a psychological level and in terms of the experiences that we have in life, a mixture of suffering and a mixture of happiness. It talks about how to deal with the mind, how to overcome defilements, how to think about the world in a skillful way. And when you put it all together, it's a recipe, it is a description of existence, which is very compelling and very powerful. And you get this feeling at the same time of there being someone behind this sutta, someone who kind of had this overview, this understanding, like a spiritual genius, the Buddha, someone who has a special insight into the human condition. Gradually this view starts to arise in you, and this is this confidence in this teaching. So sometimes called faith, sometimes confidence. And as this grows, you can read more. You can use the logical deduction, and then you experience more, and the whole path grows together in this way. And that is the right way of thinking about this. Not to reject the suttas, but always to use it together with our experience of the world. That experience of the world will also include things like scientific findings. We shouldn't really in Buddhism, there's no need to reject science. There's no need to reject things like evolution. Darwinian evolution is perfectly compatible with the Buddhist teachings. There's no need to reject things like the evolution of the universe or anything like that. All of these things basically fit in with the Buddhist narrative. And it should do, it should be like that. It should do, because we are searching for truth. This is what Buddhism is about. It's the yata bhuta jnana dasana, which is the Buddhist teachings, seeing and understanding things in accordance with reality. And this is one of the things that makes the Buddhist teaching so powerful, that it is about truth. We should search for truth. And if there is a clash with one kind of truth, say the Buddhist truth clashes with the scientific truth, then it needs to be resolved. It is not acceptable for us to reject truth. So we need to somehow resolve that problem. And perhaps we will find that there are certain suttas that are not authentic, and there are certain ways of doing that. Perhaps sometimes we will find, that the science is not mature enough yet. Scientific, science also evolves. It takes time for science to understand certain things. And the nature of the mind is one of those things that takes a long time for science to understand. Science doesn't really have a good understanding of the mind. But all of these things should ultimately fit together. And this is what this is pointing towards. So it looks like there is a problem in this sutta, but if you read it in the right way, it actually comes together very nicely. And one of the nice things about the sutta is that sometimes you do have little paradoxes. You have things that seem to be contradictory that you have to resolve. And there are some of my favorite suttas have precisely that kind of something which looks paradoxical, but then when you look carefully, you realize actually it's just the Buddha's way of explaining the Buddhist teachings in a beautiful way that makes you think, that makes you look at life in a new way, that makes you understand things in a new way. And this is the purpose of paradox. And the point, of course, is that the way that we tend to think about the world is not the way the world is. Some of you may remember that the Buddha talks about where the ordinary people see happiness, the Buddha sees suffering. And where the Buddha sees suffering, ordinary people where the Buddha sees happiness, ordinary people see suffering. So we have a tendency to understand the world upside down. And for that reason, paradox is sometimes useful to help us to approach that different worldview that the Buddha presents, a different outlook, the different way of grasping this reality here. So, having looked at the beginning of the Kālāmas Sutta, we never seem to get much beyond the beginning of the suttas. Everything sort of stops at the beginning. And then it kind of, hopefully we'll make a bit more headway today. But I want to look a little bit at what the Buddha means when he says that we should go by experience and we should not go by logic or suttas, at least initially. What does it mean by this thing, experience? This is obviously a very important point. And you will see that what he is talking about is actually very obvious, and it's something that we can all relate to in a very simple way. So this is what the Buddha says next, after saying that you should give them up when you know that they lead to harm and suffering. And then he says, what do you think, Kālāmas? Does greed come up in a person for their welfare or harm? Harm, sir. A greedy individual overcome by greed kills living creatures. steals, commits adultery, lies, and encourages others to do the same. Is that for their lasting harm and suffering? Yes, sir. Yeah, so that is the beginning of this idea. Thank you for bringing up the suttas there, Eileen. That's marvelous. And we can now see what I'm talking about. So this is where the Buddha starts out. Yeah, he starts out by asking, when you are greedy, yeah, is that for your happiness or for your suffering? And it is, they say, for your suffering. They say here it is for the suffering. Why? Well, because if you are greedy, then you tend to do immoral things. Immorality comes out of these defilements of the mind. Yeah, because of the defilements of the mind, that is why we do things that are immoral. And here you can see the immorality is phrased in terms of the first four of the 5 precepts. Yeah, so these are the first 4 of the 5 precepts that are mentioned here. And that is the idea of immorality. But you can expand that. You can expand that to include all kinds of immorality, you know, harsh speech or divisive speech or whatever it is, or even things that are not included there. Yeah, things that you might, you can maybe add to that list if you wish. Even things like your views of the world or just internal anger and all of these kind of things can be added to that list. But it comes from this word greed. That is what drives this whole thing. And if you think about it, if you reflect on this idea, you will know that whenever you do something that is not nice towards someone else, yeah, or towards an animal or towards whatever it is, why do you do that? And you will find that it's almost always driven by your internal defilements. This is what drives these actions of ours. That is the real problem that we have to deal with. Yeah. So if you have greed or you have desires, this is about the desires in regard to the sensory world, the 5 senses that we're talking about here. And if you have desires in regard to these things, that is where the breaches of these moral rules come out. Later on, just afterwards, it talks also about anger and ill will. It talks about confusion just afterwards. So these are also part of that defilements of the mind that drive our bad conduct in life and our inability to live a moral life. So this is where the problem arises. Yeah. So really, it comes back to the mind. It says you something about the mind. And again, reflect about it. If you are, you know, if you are the opposite, if you have no anger, if you have no greed, if you have a beautiful sense of kindness and compassion for the people and the world around you, if you feel very generous at heart, you know, sometimes you just feel all this kindness inside of you. You feel like you want to share positive things with the world. You want to kind of do something nice, and you just have this positive energy inside of you. Yeah, I think we all have that sometimes. And when you have that kind of feeling, that is a feeling of the mind without defilements. And that feeling of the mind without defilements, you know, yeah, from within that you will never do anything bad at that particular time. Yeah, you know that that mind stops you from doing these things. So the defilements of the mind, the greed, the hatred, and the confusion, these always leads to the harm because they lead to the breach of the precepts. And you may be able to restrain yourself a little bit, to hold back on the greed, hold back on the ill will. But in the long run, you won't be able to restrain yourself. In the long run, it will come out, yeah, because your mindfulness is not going to be good enough to always restrain yourself. So even if you have a reasonably good mindfulness, even if you restrain yourself somewhat, it will never be perfected. It will always be a problem. So greed is problematic. Yeah. And so here we see the problem with greed, especially in regard to other people. Yeah, if you do bad things towards others, of course, they will suffer. So it leads to the harm for others. Yeah. And that is one part of it, that when we act immorally, it is bad for other people. But I think more important than the fact that it leads to other people's harm, it leads also to your harm. Yeah, when you do something that is bad and immoral, you also suffer as a consequence. And this is really the critical thing to understand, because sometimes if it only has to do with other people, then sometimes we think, okay, the other person needs it, the other person deserves it, the other person needs to hear what I have to say, or they have done something bad, and we need to punish them, or we need to, do something like that. But if you remember that it also leads to your own suffering and your own problems and your own harm, it becomes far more powerful incentive to actually deal with this. And this is what I would really recommend you to look at very carefully, is how these things lead to something bad inside of yourself. And it is very obvious, and I love these simple teachings, and these are the things when the Buddha talks about the kamma that ripens in this very life, the ditta dhamma kamma. Yeah, a very important concept in the Buddhist teachings. We often think about kamma as something that ripens in the future, but kamma also ripens in this very life. How does it ripen in this very life? And what I really would recommend you is to try to see if you can experience that in yourself, how things ripen in your own life. Yeah, see what happens when you do something which is not ideal, something which is perhaps a little bit not nice. Yeah, you get your ill will and anger, sometimes it kind of gets out of hand, and then we say something which is not the right thing to say to somebody. How does that feel to you afterwards, especially when you understand that you haven't done quite the right thing here? And what you will notice that it tends to feel bad. Yeah, it tends to have a negative consequence for you. And the more we do of things that are bad, the more we build up these negative feelings inside of us. Yeah, every time we do something which is driven by a bad motive, by ill will, or by too much greed, and you tell somebody off, or you do something which isn't kind, every time you do that, you build up the negative qualities in your own mind. It's like you're building up this darkness, the grayness, the lack of happiness and contentment inside of you. Do you want that mountain of darkness inside of you? And of course, the answer is no. So if you want to avoid building up these negative things, and the more they build up, the more your character becomes that kind of person. You become more like a dark individual. Yeah, and we can see that in the world. Sometimes you see people who are like taken over by the darkness of things, yeah, by the negative actions and all of that. And they seem like almost like ghosts in the human realm. And they are very problematic precisely because they live in a bad way. So if you understand how this affects you, you become very careful. You become very concerned about not doing anything bad because you know how it affects you. You know that every time you do something which is wrong, you're taking one step backwards on the Buddhist path. You're making yourself less pure-hearted. You're destroying those good qualities inside of yourself, and you're moving backwards instead of moving forwards on this path. And this is when I talked about earlier about the idea of right view. Yeah, I was saying that right view is what distinguishes someone, or which is at the very beginning of the Noble Eightfold Path, and it also distinguishes someone who is able to meditate from someone who is not. This is the sort of thing I was referring to, understanding the consequences of these things, understanding how they relate to your experience and your life, and how you're dragging yourself down. You're being your own enemy if you fall for these things. And then your mindfulness starts to arise. And not only does your mindfulness arise, but you have the instruction at the back of your mind. You know what you have to do next. So mindfulness is interesting because you can be mindful of many different things, but we need to direct the mindfulness to those things that are really important in our life so we can regulate ourselves. A lot of mindfulness courses will talk about the regulation of emotions, and of course that is very important to be able to regulate our emotions, but also we need to regulate our responses to the world, regulate our responses to the people around us. And the more you understand how we let ourselves down by living immorally, the more powerful that becomes in your mind, the more clearly you see that, the more obvious, the more clear your mindfulness is going to be on that. So whenever the problem arises, bang, you are mindful and you will deal with it in the right way. So this is mindfulness itself depends on these other factors to become really strong and to become powerful and to be directed in the right place, so that actually it has some kind of long-term effect on the spiritual path. And I love this idea, of the Buddha, when the Buddha says that when you are immoral, you are like your own enemy. Yeah, and the question is, do you want to be your own enemy or would you like to be your own friend? And the answer is obvious. We would like to be our own friend. Why would you not want to be your own friend? It is, being friends with someone means you care for them. It means you look after them. So you learn to look after yourself in a way that actually works. And looking after yourself in a way that works is paradoxically to be kind to other people. Because when you are kind to other people, you will reap the benefits of that in the long run. So you are kind to yourself by being kind to others. And that is why the Buddha says, and this is one of those beautiful suttas in the Kosala saṃyutta, in the connected discourse of the Buddha says that someone who acts immorally or acts badly towards another person, they are their own enemy. Why? Because you're creating suffering for yourself in the long run by acting badly towards other people. So be your own friend. Yeah, be your own. Have an open heart to yourself. Be kind to yourself. Understand the causes and the connections here. Look into your own life. See what it feels like when you act towards others in the wrong way. And when you understand that, you will actually start to change your habits, and you will look in a different way, and you will start to become more firm in your morality. Not just morality, but in your kindness, in your generosity towards others, in your sense of compassion, and all of these kind of things. And we need more of that in this world. If every one of us can be a bit more kind and compassionate, wow, we are all making the world a better place. And we need that in this world. There's so much bad things happening in the world around us. There's also a lot of good things, but sometimes if you read the news, you wonder what's going on in the world. And sometimes we need that kindness. So at least let us as Buddhists, let us be beacons of that kindness. And then we will, maybe we will have an effect on the entire world around us as a consequence. So we need to overcome this greed. The greed is the root problem. We start by overcoming by restraining ourselves and following the precepts, but then we understand that in the long run, it is actually the greed itself that is problematic. So you can see what is happening here. What is happening here is that we start off with the idea of right view. The right view is the idea that morality is something positive in our lives. It makes our lives more meaningful. It makes our life more happy. We reduce the suffering and the problems in our life. Morality is a very important part of our existence as human beings. That is the right view, And then from that right view, we get the right intention. The right intention is then, okay, now I'm going to live better. I'm going to live in the right way, We have a more purpose, we have more meaning, we have a different kind of goal for our existence, living in a better way. And then when that right intention comes in, then of course you start to act on that intention. You start to become a more moral person. Right speech, right action starts to happen. And then you can see how this whole path kind of comes out of this. And this is why I was saying that what we are seeing here and what I'm looking at really is the Noble Eightfold Path. This is how this unfolds. And all the suttas have that kind of structure, the structure of the path unfolding in a certain way. So this is how it comes out. But ultimately, what you can also see here is that it is not enough to just be moral. You actually have to deal with the greed itself, because the greed is the source here. The greed is what drives all of these other problems. So if you can deal with the greed, then you are dealing with all the problems in one go. So how can we deal with greed? And the first thing to understand here is to understand that greed here is a very strong word in the English language. It means like you want all of these things. But the Pali word lobha, which is behind this, I don't think it is all that accurate to translate it as greed. What it means all of those desires that we have in the sensory realm, yeah, all the attachments that we have to the sensory world. That is really what it is referring to. And that attachment that we have to the sensory world is a very profound attachment. It is very profound because we live almost all our lives in the sensory world. Yeah, everything you do from the moment you wake up in the morning to the time you go to bed at night is in that sensory world. We see, we hear, we taste, we smell, and we touch things, and our whole world really evolves around that. And our identity is also it is to some extent bound up with that world, yeah, with our relationships in that world, with the things that we own in that world, with our status within that world. So the sensory world is it's almost everything that we have. And the spiritual world, which goes beyond that, for most people, it is only a very tiny part of their lives. So this is the right way to think about sensuality or the sensory world, yeah? So when we talk about greed and we talk about the sensory world, that is what we're talking about. So if we want to reduce our attachment to that world, it's almost all-encompassing. Yeah, it is a very profound thing to do, because what we are doing is that we are reducing our attachment almost to everything that we know. And all that is really left apart from that are some of the spiritual feelings that you may have from time to time. Yeah, the spiritual feelings of kindness, of sharing, of generosity, or maybe sometimes the spiritual feelings of meditation practice, the joy you get in meditation, the peace you have in meditation, and all of that, that is what remains. But you are starting to lose a little bit of that interest in the world, ordinary world around us. That is what it means to reduce greed in this particular context. So how can we do that? And there is a number of ways in which this can be done. But I would recommend you to go very gently, because if you don't go gently, it's going to be very confronting. So you have to start in a very gentle way with how to deal with this. And I don't usually recommend, doing too much of the, 31 parts of the body contemplation, that kind of stuff, because sometimes that can be very off-putting, especially if you live an ordinary life. But more just to remember the drawbacks of that sensory world. What is the downside of the sensory world? Yeah, and one of the ways of doing that right now is, if you look, when I talk about the sensory world, we mean everything out there. Everything out there. It's an enormous world out there. And when you think about the world out there, everything beyond us, everything outside of us, yeah, you can see that there is vast amount of problems in that world. And we have seen it now through the COVID situation around the world. You see how much suffering it leads to in humanity, yeah, when we have these kind of problems. We can't do what we ordinarily want. We are restricted in so many ways, and people have all kinds of psychological problems because of that. In the monastery, we have been very happy because of the COVID situation, because it's been, especially in the beginning, there was nobody coming to the monastery, and it was just so peaceful and quiet. So we said, yay, COVID. So we were kind of saying that for monks and nuns, it's kind of the best possible situation, and everything was really marvelous. But most people don't think like that, because you have a different lifestyle. So it reminds you of what the world really is like. Yeah, nothing has gone wrong. COVID is part of the world. And of course, when this COVID is over, most people become stupid and they forget about COVID. But there's always another COVID lurking around the corner. And another COVID lurking around the corner is not necessarily an illness. It could be some other kind of big problem in the world. Yeah, it could be some other issue which arises. And, there are many problematic issues on the horizon. You can almost see them coming. Yeah, you can see all the political problems in the world. You see all the strange leaders, yeah, that are kind of rising everywhere. I don't know. I just find it very weird to see all these leaders around the world who do weird things and who seem to be very like almost warmongering and all, very hostile. And it's terrible when we have leaders like that, because it affects every one of us when we have bad leaders. So that is kind of worrying. Yeah, and then you have, of course, the climate change and the climate situation. So what all of these things should do, they shouldn't really make you despair, they shouldn't make you depressed. If you use these things wisely, it will remind you of the downsides of the problems with that world, of the impermanence, of the way how it is always unreliable, how you can never know what is going to happen around the corner. It is so unreliable, that world. And when you understand the unreliability, when you understand this is the way the world is, it is not an aberration, nothing has gone wrong, this is the nature of this world. When you get that, it gives you an impetus to value the spiritual life more. You're starting to understand the world as Buddha understood this world. This is how the Buddha understood the world. He understood in a very deep way how unreliable it actually is, how things can change just like that. And suddenly everything is upside down. And we forget that. When the times are good, when we are happy, when we're doing our things, when you all can come to Jhana Grove to come for the retreats, yeah, and you come down here and you can listen to Ajahn Brahma's wonderful stories and jokes, and he can, whatever it is that you do, and it's marvelous when we can do that. But it is so unreliable. Suddenly you can't come to Australia anymore. Suddenly I can't even travel to Singapore and or Malaysia. Yeah, I can't, because of these things. And that is the nature of this reality here. And when you start to get this on a deep level, you start to lose an interest in that entire sensory world, that whole world of outside there, which is always going to let you down, always be problematic. And your interest in the things of the world, in the statuses of the world, in all of these things, you start to think, enough of all of that, because if I attach to this, I am going to suffer down the line. That is what you see here. So this is so beautiful, yeah, because it's so beautiful because it means that you can turn a difficult situation into something extremely positive. And once you start to live in the world in this way, you start to think about the world in this way, your values are starting to change. You are starting to get right view. The Noble Eightfold Path, the first factor, is starting to get established. You start to see that actually it is kindness, it is the inner qualities of human beings, it is the care that we have for others, it is the compassion in our heart, it is the wisdom that we carry with us, that we use when we deal with others. That is what matters. That is what really this life is about. And when we live in that way, then things really start to change. And then the Noble Eightfold Path starts to happen as a consequence. So this is how I would recommend you to gradually overcome this idea we call the attachment to the external world, reminding yourself of how uncertain it is. And I could say much, much more about that, because that uncertainty in the external world, it is so all-encompassing. Yeah, it has to do with the very personal, our personal lives, with our loved ones and everything. All of that is unreliable. All of that is uncertain. And it's kind of terrible when you first hear about it, but after a while, the penny starts to drop and you start to change your values. You start to look at the world in a new way. You think more like the Buddha. You think more like Ajahn Brahm. And then now you start to understand why it is that Ajahn Brahm is able to meditate so easily. Why Ajahn Brahm, he just relaxes, he just chills, he closes his eyes and kind of bang, everything just happens. That is why he does that, because he understands in a very deep way how unsatisfactory that world is and how happy the world of the mind is and how controllable the world of the mind is, because it is inside each one of us. It is not subject to the same kind of law of impermanence as the external things. It is still subject to impermanence, but in a different way from the world outside. Anyway, that is just to give you some idea of the how the Buddha is talking about this, yeah, what he means by these things here in the Kālāmas Sutta. And of course, I like to take the opportunity to expand on these things quite a bit, because these are very powerful and beautiful teachings. And if you do think about them in the right way, this is how I like to think about right view, because it is very practical. It is very pragmatic. We can use it right here and right now, given the situation in the world. And it starts to have a very strong impact on who you are, how you think, and how you actually live your life. So then, having said this about greed, the Buddha says the same thing about what is it about anger? Yeah, about anger and then confusion. So these are then the second and the third of these underlying defilements of the mind that he talks about, and exactly the same thing that he talks about with these other defilements. So if you are angry or you are confused, yeah, is that for your welfare or for your harm? And of course, the Kālāmas, they are very beautiful, and they say these things are for your harm. Why are they for your harm? Because they lead to you breaching of the laws or the rules of morality. Yeah, you steal, you kill, and all of these kind of things, just as you do with greed. Yeah, so the same problem. The defilements are what makes us do these things. When you are confused, you don't really know what you're doing, and sometimes you do unskillful things as a consequence. So the same ideas behind this. And I'm not going to go into much more detail now, even though we could that, because there's much more to be said about this, but let's leave it at that for now. And then the Buddha says to the Kālāmas, what do you think, Kālāmas? Are these things skillful or unskillful? Unskillful, sir, they say very beautifully. Yeah. Are they blameworthy or blameless? Blameworthy, sir. Are they criticized or praised by sensible people? They are criticized by sensible people, sir. So here you have all these different ways in which we can think about this. Yeah. So just to kind of drive home the point that this is unfortunate and these things are counterproductive. They are unskillful. Yeah, they are unskillful in the sense that they are harmful and they lead to our harm, and they are unskillful in the sense that it clouds our judgment. It makes us unable to live in a good way, and all of these kind of things. And they are blameworthy. Yes, and one of those interesting things is that if other people see us do bad things, then those people who are wise in the world, they will criticize you. Yeah, they will blame you. They are blameworthy things. And if we are wise, we will also tend to criticize ourselves for doing these things. So we become like self-reproach, where you criticize yourself and you feel bad about yourself as well. And then you have this last one, which is this very interesting idea. It says that it is criticized by the wise. Yeah, wise people criticize you if you do these things. And which is kind of fascinating, because earlier on, when we read out the reasons we should not follow things, it said you should not follow things just because someone is your teacher or someone is like a good speaker. That is not enough reason to follow that person's advice. We should do it only when we know things for yourself. Yeah. And now the Buddha says we should follow the wise people. So you can see there is like little paradoxes here throughout the suttas. On the one hand, we should be careful with just following the teachers, but on the other hand, we should follow what wise people say. Yeah. So there is again, there is this sense of, we have to be very careful how we judge this and how we look at these paradoxes. And the idea is that, of course, here, if we have strong faculties ourselves, if we have the ability to look at people and to distinguish who is really wise in this world and who is not, yeah, if we understand that immoral people are not wise, if we understand that people who have a lot of metta and kindness, that they tend to be wise, if we are skilled ourselves and we are smart about this, yeah, then we are actually able to distinguish between the wise people in the world and the unwise people. Then we can follow their advice. So, but be careful. Yeah, I mean, be very careful. It can be very difficult to distinguish between the wise people and the unwise people. Don't jump to conclusions too quickly, and be very careful with how you think about these things. It is so easy to get these things the wrong way around. And then if you get it the wrong way around, then, it just doesn't work out. And then you are down the line, you are really disappointed because the person you thought was wise turns out to be a dodgy character and all of that kind of thing. So may you never have those such dodgy characters in your life. May you always have the truly wise people that you follow in your life. But be careful, don't just follow the crowd, because so many people in the world, they are crowd followers, and you will hear arguments like, for example, if people are Christians, they will say, oh, but there are so many Christians in the world, right? So how can they all be wrong? And the answer to that question is, well, that is precisely why they are probably wrong, because there are so many of them, because we know that the average person is not going to be very wise. The average person is usually get things wrong. If the average person was wise and the average person got things right, there wouldn't be any suffering in the world. The fact there's so much suffering in the world means that the average person tends to get things right. So that is a really bad argument that everyone thinks this, therefore you should think so too. No, that is exactly why you should not think so. And you should also be careful in Buddhism as well. This is not just about this. I'm not really kind of arguing against Christianity specifically. This is always true. It is also true in Buddhism. Sometimes you will hear people say, oh, this is arahant, everybody else thinks so, therefore you too should think so. No, if everyone thinks so, then there is grounds for being skeptical. You should always value things. You should value your own ability to judge these things. You should never just follow the crowd, just be a sheep and just follow along. If you do that, you are guaranteed to be disappointed down the track. Trust yourself, trust your ability to make distinctions, but be humble at the same time. Don't come to quick judgments, and don't follow the crowd. Don't follow what I say, just forget what I say and then come to your own judgment instead. And then you are going to be on the right track. So we have to be self-reliant in a certain way. Otherwise, it's not going to work out. And then you can start to judge that people are wise. And this is how I have come to the conclusion that the Buddha is really wise. It is very hard to find any more wise than the Buddha. He's kind of the top of the apex. He's kind of the very top of the pyramid. This is why I have come to the conclusion that some of the monks that I know really well also have a lot of wisdom. People like Ajahn Brahm is one of my favorite monks, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't be living here for so long. But there's many more than Ajahn Brahm. There's many monks who live everywhere around the world. One of my favorite monks who I visited quite recently is the monk Ajahn Ganha in Thailand, this beautiful Thai monk who has just this enormous amount of metta and peace and all of these marvelous qualities. When you're with him, it's kind of hard to understand how someone can radiate so much positive qualities. And these are the things that give you a sense of, the sense of wisdom in the world, of something special going on. Because if people can be like that, you know that there's something special going on. Anyway, so sensible people, and so it is criticized by sensible people. So if then you start to listen a bit more, if it is criticized by dodgy people, you don't really care so much. All the dodgy people, whatever they say is kind of irrelevant. And then the Buddha asks again, when you undertake these bad things, do they lead to harm and suffering or not? And how do you see this? And when you undertake them, they lead to harm and suffering. That is how we see it. You can see how the Buddha is leading everyone along in this nice way, and gradually getting them to agree and to see things from his point of view. He's very, very skillful here, but using their personal experience, to kind of help them along. So Kālāmas, when I said, don't go by oral tradition, don't go by all of these things, by lineage, by testament, by canonical authority, don't rely on logic, don't rely on inference, don't go by reasoned contemplation. Don't go by acceptance of a view after consideration. Don't go by the appearance of competence. And don't think the ascetic is our respected teacher. But when you know for yourself these things are unskillful, these things are blameworthy, they are criticized by sensible people, and when you undertake them, they lead to harm and suffering, then you should give them up. That is what I said, and this is why I said it. So, there you are. So this is how the Buddha, this is very, again, very, very beautiful, yeah, and you can kind of feel for yourself whether you are living in the right way, to see how it affects you on the path when you practice. Is it beneficial what you're doing? Is it leading you in the right direction? Or are you overdoing things a bit too much? Are you suppressing things perhaps, or repressing things? Or are you doing things in a way that actually has a benefit in the long run? This is what you should be looking at. So now we come to the other side of the coin. And the Buddha says, what do you think, Kālāmas? Does contentment come up in a person for their welfare or for their harm? For their welfare, sir. An individual who is content, not overcome by greed, doesn't kill a living creature, doesn't steal or commit adultery, doesn't lie or encourage others to do the same. Is that for their lasting welfare and happiness? Yes, sir. So when you are content, when you are happy with the things in the world, when you understand the limitations of the world, and when you're just happy with it inside of yourself, and you have a sense of loving kindness for the people around you, how do you act? You act with kindness. You don't do these things that drag you down the drain and lead you in the wrong direction. And what is also interesting about what the Buddha says here, he says also this idea of you encourage others to do the same. And it had the reverse before. You encourage others to do bad things, but here you encourage others to do good things. And this is part of the morality of the Buddhist path, is that we encourage others to live in the right way. This is kind of what my life is like as a Buddhist monk. This is what kind of being here and giving talks is about encouraging people to live in a good way. So such a wonderful existence to be a Buddhist monk, because all you do is good things. You're always kind of hopefully living in the right way and hopefully encouraging others. It's just a marvelous existence. And we can all do that to some extent, reminding others of the importance of these things, part of the idea of sila in Buddhism. So, and then he says the same thing for the other defilements. What do you think, Kālāmas? When love comes up in a person, is it for their welfare or harm? So this is now the non-anger, the love or the compassion. And then when clarity comes up in the person, it's the opposite of confusion. Is it for their welfare or for their harm? And again, you don't breach any morality rules when these things come up, because you just want to be kind. And then the Buddha carries on. I'm going to do it a bit shorter now. What do you think, Kālāmas? Are these things skillful or unskillful? They are skillful. Are they blameworthy or blameless? They are blameless, sir. Criticized or praised by sensible people, praised by sensible people. When you undertake them, do they lead to welfare and happiness or not? Or how do you see this? When you undertake them, they lead to welfare and happiness. That is how we see it. When you have the good qualities in your heart, it always has good consequences. When you act on those, you are like your own friend, because it leads to your own happiness in the long run. This is the power of this. And so, Kālāmas, when I said, don't go by oral transmission, don't go by all of these things, but when you know for yourselves, these things are skillful, blameless, praised by sensible people, etc., then that you should keep them, acquire them, and practice them. That is what I said, and that is why I said it. So, yeah, so there you are. If you wish, you can contemplate that sutta a bit more, if you like, on your own. But I will leave it at that, because I think otherwise we're going to be going too long. And then, when the Buddha have spoken about these things, yeah, remember again that we are talking here about really the Noble Eightfold Path. So the Buddha has talked about the idea of morality. He's also been talking really about greed and anger and confusion, which are about the mental defilement. And that has to do with right effort on the Eightfold Path. Yeah, so he has been talking about the first 6 factors now of the Noble Eightfold Path. And then at the very end, he talks about the last 2 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. So the whole Noble Eightfold Path is actually included in this Kālāmas Sutta, which is really fascinating. Yeah, when you read it, it may not be obvious to you that that actually is the case, but actually it is an unusual exposition of the Noble Eightfold Path. So at the very end here, the Buddha says, then that noble disciple is rid of desire, rid of ill will, unconfused, aware, yeah, sati, mindful. This is aware here is probably, I haven't got the Pali here, but I think it probably is like sampajano or something like that, and mindful. Yeah, so now you have sati. This is how sati really becomes strong and really arises. And then when that sati and that awareness is strong, then they meditate, spreading a heart full of love to one direction, to the second direction, and the third, and the fourth. In the same way, above, below, across, and everywhere, all around, they spread a heart full of love to the whole world, abundant, expansive, limitless, free of enmity and ill will. And then the sutta continues with the same thing for compassion, and the same thing for mudita, for the altruistic joy, and the same thing also for the upekkha, the 4 Brahma Viharas. Yeah, so you can see here, founded on that sila, founded on the purity of the mind that you already have. That is when you start your meditation practice. That is when it enables you to spread the metta and spread this beautiful mind states to the whole world as a consequence. And this is then how the meditation comes about. He could also have put the breath meditation in there. He could have put the satipatthana meditation in there. All of these things are roughly equivalent, because when you get to this point, you have the ability to meditate on almost any topic. Yeah. And also implied in this is the samadhi experience, because when you practice metta in this way and you purify the mind in a very deep sense, then the samadhi also arises out of that. This is how samadhi happens, coming out of the happiness, coming out of the joy of the Brahma Viharas. That is how they actually arise. And in this way, the whole Eightfold Path is actually part of this. So that is this marvelous Kālāmas Sutta, and I probably haven't really taught it in as much detail or as well as I should have, and I apologize for that, but the retreat is only so long and we only have so many sessions, so we have to we should do a little bit more than the Kālāmas Sutta. So anyway, but you can reflect a little bit on your own about that sutta, and then see what you where that brings you. But before I before we stop and before we have a meditation together, let me just maybe read out a couple of more little suttas here, because these are also very beautiful suttas, and it's nice to add to what we have been doing a little bit, I think. And these suttas are verses. These are verses found in some very, what I think, very inspiring and interesting parts of the Pali Canon. These are verses that you probably have never heard before, yeah, because these are not very often taught. But if you are interested in these kind of verses, and I must admit, I find more and more verses can be very inspiring, because there comes a point when you know enough of the Dhamma, and I know that some of you, you are really, you know the Dhamma really, really well. And sometimes all you need is to be inspired to do the right thing, to live in the right way. And sometimes these verses have that inspirational quality, yeah, whereby they give you that feeling, yeah, I got to do the right thing, and I have to practice in the right way. And so this first little verse here that I have included here is from the connected discourses of the Buddha, the Saṃyutta Nikāya. This is from the Devata Saṃyutta, which is the first chapter of connected discourses. And this is the first of those suttas. And this first sutta, this is what it sounds like. It's just one verse. Yeah, it's a very, very short one. And this is how it reads. This is the Buddha speaking. Yeah, the Buddha says, one should associate only with the good. With the good, one should foster intimacy. Having learned the true Dhamma of the good, one is released from all suffering. So very short, yeah, very kind of pithy little teaching by the Buddha, and very simple, but it is also actually a very powerful statement that says a lot about the Dhamma and how the Dhamma actually works. So the good here, who are the good that we should associate with? And very often in Buddhism, the good are the Sappurisa, or the Aryans, the noble people in the world. Those people who have understood the Dhamma, who carry the Dhamma around with them as part of their psychology and around them in their heart, because they've understood what these teachings are about. So it's good to hang out with such good people, yeah, the people who are special, who have special qualities. So this is the first one. And of course, that would be the Buddha. So it's good to hang out with the Buddha a little bit. And it may also be other people who you, through your experience, have special qualities, yeah, who have a lot of kindness and metta and have all of these qualities deeply inside of them and are wise in a certain way. So this is where we start out. Yeah, we should hang out with these good people. That's what it says here. Associate with them. You should foster intimacy with them. Yeah, you should be with them a lot if you can. And then what happens if you do that? And this is kind of what is so interesting here. It is so interesting because it sounds almost too easy to be true. Having learned the good Dhamma, the true Dhamma is the Saddhamma. This is the Dhamma of the Buddhas and the Dhamma of anyone who understands their teachings. Having learned that Dhamma, yeah, you are released from suffering here. That's all you have to do. Yeah, all you have to do is to kind of hang out with the nice people in the world, learn the Dhamma from those nice people, and then you are released from suffering as a consequence. Isn't that marvelous? There's something it's almost too easy, yeah, almost too easy to be true. How can you just hang out with the good people and you are released from all suffering? But that is, in a sense, what the Buddha is saying here. And it is, again, this very simple teaching. And when you read it, you may think, this is an exaggeration. It can't possibly be true. How can you just hang out with good people and you are released from suffering? I don't believe it. Yeah, Buddhism must be false. This is too simple. Can't be like this. But remember, we have just been looking at the Noble Eightfold Path. And the Noble Eightfold Path starts out with right view. Where does that right view come from? That right view comes from the noble people. It comes from those people who have seen reality as it actually is. It comes from the Buddha. It comes from the noble ones. It comes from the Sappurisa. That is where it comes from. And if you don't connect with other good people, then you have to rely on your own biases, your own limited right view. There may be parts of you which has a little bit of right view, but there's also going to be parts of an ordinary person which is not right. And to that extent, we do depend on people like the Buddha and other areas to actually enable us to see things in the right way. So to be able to have right view, to be able to get the Noble Eightfold Path, even to start, yeah, the very beginning of the Noble Eightfold Path, you need these saparisas, you need these noble ones in your life to point you in the right direction, to give you the right values, to show you the importance of kindness and why this really matters, and then gradually move you forward on the Noble Eightfold Path. So this is the first point. Without that, there is no starting point. But the other thing which is so interesting about this is that you will have noticed in your own life that once you hear these Dhamma teachings, there is something very compelling about it. There's something which, once you hear it, you want to do these things. Yeah, that is why you are coming to this retreat now, why you're listening to these talks. That is why many of you are practicing the 5 precepts in daily life. That is why you regularly come on meditation retreats, because you understand that there's something to be done here. Otherwise, you wouldn't come on these things. And whether you realize it or not, that is actually what is happening here. Yeah. So what the Buddha is saying is that once you have that right view, these other things just happen as a matter of course. You gradually, you get into these things. Gradually, your intention, your values, the way that you look at the world. There's a beautiful German word called Weltanschauung, which means like the outlook that we have. All of these things change, and you start to think about the world in a different way. That is your intention starting to align with the intention of the Buddha. Then the morality comes, and then eventually the meditation, everything happens as a consequence. Yeah, so what the Buddha is saying is the power of listening to the real Dhamma, the power of hanging out with the right people, the power of trying to understand what these people are saying, the power of trying to enter the word of the Buddha, not just hearing it, but reflecting on it, entering it, seeing how it applies to your own life. Not just thinking of the word of the Buddha as some kind of ancient teaching that applied 2,500 years ago, but seeing it as something that actually applies to your life, my life, all of our lives, here and now, in this very day and age. Then it starts to become powerful, and then it leads you stage by stage, all the way to the end of suffering itself. So, that is that beautiful little verse on the importance of the foundations of the spiritual life, and how that kind of, again, it fits with the idea of right view. Yeah, because this is how right view arises, and there are so many ways in which this is actually taught in the suttas, and this is one of these ways. And it kind of caught my eye when I was reading the suttas the other day, and I kind of thought, wow, that's very beautiful, and it's very simple, and it's very useful to be reminded of these very simple teachings. So let us stop there for today, and let us leave the suttas for today, and we'll come back to more suttas tomorrow. And we will, hopefully you are enjoying this. If you're not enjoying it, you can complain to Ajahn Brahm and tell Ajahn Brahm that I'm going too slow or I'm going too fast. I already know that I speak too fast. Everyone says that. So I apologize for that. And I'm hopefully you're getting used to the way I speak after a while. But now let's do some meditation together, because that is what this is all about, and see if we can allow these teachings to inspire us a little bit also in our meditation practice. So, okay, everyone. So make sure that you, as always, you start out in the right way. If you start out in the right way, then everything tends to happen as a consequence. So make sure that you take a bit of time by closing your eyes and then feeling your body, making sure that you are comfortable. I would recommend you, when you listen to the talks, to sit in one posture and then change the posture for meditation. In other words, sit on a chair perhaps during the talk, and then if you want to sit cross-legged, do that only for the meditation. Otherwise, it may become too strenuous for your body. Or you can also sit on a chair during your meditation practice. It doesn't matter, whatever makes you feel at ease. That is the critical thing. So you can really relax, really be kind to yourself, really care for yourself, make sure that you are your own best friend, as the Buddha says, not your own enemy, making yourself feel tense and tight, but allowing yourself to relax, allowing yourself to just be who you are. Self-acceptance, not kind of pushing yourself around too much. So take that time at the beginning and just relax, allow things to be, allow the world to be, and just be patient as you allow things to calm down. And as you do this, please remember not to do your meditation. Meditation is the opposite of doing. In fact, please forget about the word meditation, because the moment you think meditation, usually you think there's a certain thing that you have to do. You have to sit in a certain posture. You have to watch your breath. You have to be mindful. But please don't think like that, because the moment you think what you have to do, then you are already on the wrong track. The idea of meditation is just to relax. The idea is to allow the meditation to happen without you doing anything. And to do this is so important to give rise to the right kind of perception. And as I mentioned yesterday, one way of doing this is to reflect what it is like when you come back home after a long day at work and you feel tired and you just sit down. When you do that, what do you do at that time? And what you do at that time is really nothing. You don't think when you are tired, oh, I must be mindful. You don't think, I must think like this, I must not think like that. When you're tired and you're sitting down to relax, you just allow your mind to go. And this is what we should be doing in our meditation practice, just allowing the mind to go. And as we allow the mind to go, gradually it finds its own equilibrium. And it finds that equilibrium because we are programmed to look for the right things. The right view, which comes at the beginning, directs the mind all by itself, and there is nothing that we have to do about it. And as you do this, you know that you are on the right track. If you don't have any tensions or any tightness in the body should feel really, really relaxed. That is how you know you are on the right track. If you are not really relaxed, it means that your mind is still controlling the body. It means that you're not really letting go properly. And you need to come back to this idea of just sitting there, or just being with your mind, as if you are resting in your favorite armchair or chair, and just relaxing, and just being without doing anything at all. So come back to this very simple thing, having no ideas about what you are really doing, except relaxing, allowing things to be, being kind to yourself. Stop controlling who you should be. And please don't be discouraged if you find that your mind does not really cooperate. Please don't be discouraged if you find yourself being tired. Don't be discouraged if you find your mind thinking a lot. These are problems that almost everyone has every now and again. And even if you have a lot of it, still don't be discouraged. And the reason why these things are happening is because either you are just tired and you need a bit of rest, in which case you should allow yourself to be tired, or they are happening because you are valuing the wrong things. If you think about the world, you think about your family, you think about your job, you think about these problems, it's because you are valuing these things. But instead, remind yourself of the uncertainty of that world. Remind yourself of the beauty of the peace and the joy of meditation instead, and lead your mind towards real happiness, gently by understanding the idea of right view, of right value, of what really matters in the world. And if you do it in this way, it is marvelous how the mind tends towards that peace. It does take training, but it is the right way of approaching meditation practice. And if your meditation is going reasonably well, and there will be times when you have a sense of clarity and peace in your mind, then make sure not to focus too hard on the breath at those times. I think often people make the mistake of focusing too hard on the breath. And the moment you focus too hard with too much force and willpower, you start to tense up again. So instead of focusing in that way, focus on the peace. Focus on the enjoyment that is there, just being peaceful by yourself. And then leave the breath in the background. The breath is always with us. The breath is always around the corner. But don't focus on it directly, because if you do, it often leads to tension and problems. Stay instead with the beautiful part of the experience, the peace, the enjoyment that you have, and the breath is like a secondary experience at the same time. And then hopefully you can bypass the problems of feeling or not really being 100% at ease. And as your meditation comes along, make sure that you keep on monitoring your progress as you do so, and make sure that you don't fall back into the traps of tension and tightness in the body, because if you do, you are already heading in the wrong direction. You should be at ease. It should be enjoyable. So then take a few steps back and ask yourself how you can relax more into the meditation practice. But if you are moving in the right direction, you find yourself that you are at ease, you are enjoying what you're doing, then you just have to use your perception to see what you are doing in the right way. Enjoy it, take delight in what is happening. And if you are enjoying the watching of the breath, remember that the breath is like a friend, this beautiful friend who has always been there, this beautiful friend who is taking you on this marvelous adventure of meditation practice. Okay, everyone. So coming close to the end once again, and I would recommend you, as always, before to the end, just to review very briefly your meditation practice. What are the things that worked in the meditation? If you feel more relaxed, more at ease, more mindful now than when you started out, why is that the case? What are the perceptions that you have developed? How does the process of letting go actually happen? Okay, everyone, that is the meditation for now. So I wish you all well. Please continue enjoying your retreat, and we'll see you back again tomorrow at 3 o'clock.